The metal walls of Harmony Station shook as another blast hit the outer shields. Red warning lights flashed in the corridors while a computer voice repeated the same message over and over. All civilians report to emergency shelters immediately, Captain. Jake Morrison ran through the narrow hallways with his team close behind him. His boots made loud sounds on the metal floor as he moved toward Section C7, where the last group of civilians waited. The Earth Defense Corps had sent his squad to this distant station only 3 months ago as part of something called the Galactic Alliance Integration Program. Now they were the only soldiers left to get everyone out alive. Morrison carried his rifle in one hand and a scanner in the other. The scanner showed red dots moving closer to the station. Those dots were Catherian attack ships, and they were winning the battle. The station's main defenses had failed 20 minutes ago, and now only the emergency shields kept the enemy from breaking through completely. "Captain, how much time do we have?" asked Sergeant Amy Collins as she jogged beside him. She was a small woman, but Morrison had seen her carry wounded soldiers. Twice her size during training exercises back on Earth. Morrison looked at his scanner again. "Maybe 15 minutes before they break through the inner shields. We need to move fast." The team reached Section C7 and Morrison hit the door controls. The thick metal door slid open with a loud hiss. Inside the emergency shelter, dozens of alien beings huddled together in small groups. Morrison had learned to recognize most of the species during his time on the station, but seeing them all together like this still felt strange. Near the far wall, a group of tall crystalline beings stood in a tight circle. These were Xanthari refugees who had come to the station after their homeworld was destroyed. Their bodies looked like they were made of living glass that changed colors when they moved. Morrison had read that they were peaceful people who valued art and music above all else. Among the Xanthari, a young mother held something small against her chest. Morrison could hear crying coming from whatever she carried, but it was not like any sound he had heard from adult Xanthari before. This sound was sharp and loud and seemed to make all the other aliens in the room move away from her. "What is that noise?" asked Private Ben Rodriguez. He was the youngest member of Morrison's team and had only been off Earth for 6 months. "I think it's a baby," Morrison said quietly. He had never seen a Xanthari infant before, but the crying sounded almost human. Morrison walked toward the group of Xanthari. As he got closer, he could see that the mother was very upset. Her crystalline skin flashed between red and purple colors, which Morrison knew meant fear and stress. The small bundle in her arms continued to cry, and the sound seemed to get louder with each passing second. "Ma'am," Morrison said in the universal translator language that all station residents used, "we need to evacuate this section now. The enemy ships are getting closer." The Xanthari mother looked up at him with large eyes that swirled with golden light. Morrison could see tears running down her face like liquid diamonds. "I cannot make him stop crying," she said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "The others are afraid of the sound." Morrison looked around the shelter and saw that she was right. The other aliens in the room had moved as far away from the crying infant as possible. A group of Corvan delegates covered their sensitive hearing organs with their hands. The Thamelian ambassador's skin flashed bright warning colors. Even the usually calm Etherian monks floated in the corners of the room with their meditation forms wobbling in distress. "Why are they afraid of a baby crying?" Rodriguez asked. Dr. Helen Martinez, the expedition's science officer, stepped forward. She had been studying alien cultures for 10 years and knew more about their customs than anyone else on the team. "Most species only make loud sounds when they are in danger," she explained. "For them, crying means something is very wrong and they should run away." Morrison nodded. This made sense from what he had learned about alien behavior. Humans were unusual in many ways, and their approach to raising young was apparently one of them. "We still need to move," Morrison told the Xanthari mother. "What is your name?" "I am called Lyra Ka," she replied. "This is my son Vex. He has been crying for 3 hours, and I do not know how to make him stop." Morrison looked at the small bundle in her arms. He could see tiny hands waving in the air and caught a glimpse of a face that looked surprisingly similar to a human baby. The infant's cries continued to fill the room, and Morrison noticed that more aliens were moving toward the exits. "Captain," Collins said urgently, "if we don't move this group soon, we're going to lose our window for evacuation." Morrison knew. She was right. The escape pods were located 2 levels down, and it would take at least 10 minutes to get everyone there safely. But every time they tried to move, the baby's cries seemed to make the other aliens panic more. "Let's try moving in small groups," Morrison suggested. "Maybe if we separate them from the noise source, they'll be able to move more easily." They spent the next hour attempting different strategies. Morrison sent Collins ahead with the first group of aliens while he stayed behind with Lyra Ka and her crying infant. But as soon as the other groups got a few corridors away, they could still hear the baby's cries echoing through the metal walls, and they would stop moving. Rodriguez tried playing music through the station's communication system to cover the sound, but this only seemed to make the baby cry louder. Dr. Martinez attempted to use medical equipment to create a sound barrier, but the portable units were not strong enough. Morrison checked his scanner again. The red dots were much closer now. He could see that the enemy ships had started targeting the station's life support systems. They had maybe 30 minutes before the air recycling units would fail. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly, "Command is asking for a status report. They want to know if we need emergency extraction." Morrison understood what this meant. Emergency extraction was military code for leaving behind anyone who could not move quickly and quietly. It was standard protocol when a mission was at risk of total failure. Morrison looked at Lyra Ka holding her crying infant. He looked at the other aliens huddled in fear around the edges of the room. He thought about all the training he had received about following orders and completing missions efficiently. Then he thought about his sister's children back on Earth and how they cried when they were scared or hungry or tired. He remembered holding his nephew during family gatherings and the way the small weight felt in his arms. "Negative," Morrison said into his communicator. "We don't leave anyone behind." The minutes crawled by like hours as Morrison and his team tried every possible solution they could think of. Baby Vex continued to cry in his mother's arms, and the sounds seemed to get more desperate with each passing moment. Lyraka rocked back and forth in the way that Xanthari mothers did, but this only seemed to make her infant more upset. Morrison watched as the other aliens in the shelter grew more agitated. The Corvan delegates had moved to the farthest corner of the room and were making low humming sounds that Dr. Martinez said was their species' way of dealing with extreme stress. The Thamelian ambassador's skin colors were flashing so rapidly that looking at them made Morrison feel dizzy. "Captain, we have a problem," said Sergeant Collins as she returned from checking the corridor outside. "The Etherian monks are refusing to move at all now. They say the infant's cries are disrupting their connection to what they call the peaceful flow of the universe." Morrison rubbed his forehead. He had dealt with difficult evacuations before, but never anything like this. On Earth, a crying baby was just a crying baby. People might feel sorry for tired parents, but nobody ran away in terror from the sound. "How long has it been now?" he asked Rodriguez. Rodriguez checked his timepiece. 2 hours and 47 minutes since we first entered this section, sir." "The baby has been crying for almost the entire time." Morrison looked at his scanner again. The red dots representing enemy ships were much closer now. He could see that they had broken through the station's outer defensive ring and were now targeting the main structure itself. The walls shook more violently with each impact. "Sir," Rodriguez continued, "Command is sending increasingly urgent messages. They're asking if we need immediate extraction for essential personnel." Morrison knew what this meant. Command was getting ready to write off everyone in this section as a necessary loss. In their view, saving a few soldiers was more important than risking everything for a group of civilians who could not or would not move. "Tell them we're still working on it," Morrison replied. Dr. Martinez approached Lyra Ka again. She had been trying to help the Xanthari mother for over an hour, but nothing seemed to work. "Have you tried the traditional Xanthari comfort techniques?" she asked through the universal translator. Lyra Ka's crystalline skin flashed with frustrated Orange colors. I have tried everything my people taught me. We sing the harmony songs. We create peaceful light patterns. We share calming thoughts through our mental connections. But nothing works on him. Morrison watched as she demonstrated some of these techniques. Lyrika's body began to glow with soft blue light and she hummed a melody that sounded beautiful to human ears. For a moment, Baby Vex seemed to quiet down and Morrison felt hopeful. Then the infant looked around the room at all the frightened aliens staring at him and began crying even louder than before. The sound was sharp and piercing and seemed to cut through the air like a knife. Why does he cry differently than adult Zentari? Morrison asked Dr. Martinez. That's what I've been trying to figure out, she replied. Adult Zentari communicate through harmonic tones and light patterns. They only make loud vocalizations when they're in immediate physical danger. But this infant seems to be using sound the way human babies do. What do you mean? Human babies cry for many reasons. They cry when they're hungry or tired or uncomfortable or scared. It's their only way to communicate their needs. But for most alien species, loud vocalizations are an emergency signal that means run away right now. Morrison began to understand the problem better. Baby Vex was probably crying because he was scared by all the strange beings staring at him and the loud noises from the battle outside. But his crying was triggering fear responses in every other species in the room. So he's scared because they're scared, and they're scared because he's crying, Morrison said. Exactly. It's a feedback loop that's getting worse instead of better. Morrison looked around the room again. The situation was becoming more desperate by the minute. Several of the smaller alien species had started making their own distress sounds. The Corvan delegates were now producing harmonic frequencies that made the metal walls vibrate. The Thamelian ambassadors were releasing stress pheromones that made the air smell like burning plastic. Captain, Collins said urgently, we just lost contact with the main command center. The enemy has broken through the primary defensive barriers. Morrison felt his stomach drop. This meant they were now completely on their own. No backup was coming and no rescue ships were waiting for them. They had to get everyone to the escape pods or they would all die when the station's main reactor was destroyed. How much time do we have? He asked. Collins checked her scanner. Based on the enemy's current approach speed, maybe 20 minutes before they reach the reactor core. Once they target that, we have about 5 minutes before total structural failure. Morrison did the math in his head. It would take at least 15 minutes to get everyone to the escape pods even if they move perfectly. But they had been trying to move this group for almost 3 hours and had made no progress at all. Sir, Rodriguez said quietly, maybe we should consider following emergency protocols. Morrison knew what he was suggesting. Emergency protocols meant leaving the civilians behind and evacuating only essential military personnel. It meant abandoning Lyrika and Baby Vex and all the other frightened beings in this room. No, Morrison said firmly, we're not leaving anyone behind. But sir, if we don't move soon, we're all going to die anyway. At least if we follow protocols, some of us might survive to fight another day. Morrison looked at the young private. Rodriguez was barely 20 years old and had joined the military because he wanted to protect innocent people. Now he was suggesting they abandon those same people to save themselves. Rodriguez, Morrison said calmly, what do you think your family would say if they knew you left a baby to die because it was too hard to save him? Rodriguez looked down at his feet. They would be disappointed in me, sir. That's right. And what do you think would happen to our alliance with these species if they found out we abandoned their people when things got difficult? The alliance would probably collapse, sir, Morrison nodded. So we're not just talking about saving lives here. We're talking about the future of human relationships with every species in this galaxy. Is that worth 20 minutes of effort? Rodriguez straightened up. Yes, sir. What are your orders? Morrison looked at Baby Vex still crying in his mother's arms. The infant's face was red and his tiny fists waved in the air. Something about the sight reminded Morrison of his nephew back on Earth and how helpless babies looked when they were upset. We try a different approach, Morrison said finally. Morrison walked slowly toward Lyrika and her crying infant. The station shook again as another enemy blast hit the outer hull, but Morrison kept his movements calm and steady. He had made a decision that went against everything his military training told him to do. The other aliens in the room watched nervously as Morrison approached the Xanthari mother. Several of them moved even further away, their various species warning sounds mixing together in a chorus of fear. The Corvan delegates were now producing such low-frequency hums that Morrison could feel the vibrations in his chest. "Leraka?" Morrison said gently, using the soft tone he had learned to use when dealing with frightened civilians. "I would like to try something if you will let me." The Xanthari mother looked up at him with eyes that swirled with golden tears. Her crystalline skin was flashing rapidly between red and purple. Colors that Dr. Martinez had explained meant extreme distress in her species. "What would you like to try?" Lyrika asked. Her voice sounded like broken wind chimes, cracked with exhaustion and fear. Morrison held out his hands slowly, palms up, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I would like to hold your son for a moment." Sometimes babies respond differently to different people. The silence in the room was complete except for Baby Vex's continued crying. Morrison could hear his team members shifting nervously behind him. He could feel the stares of dozens of alien beings focused on him. "You want to hold my child?" Lyrika asked. The universal translator made her voice sound confused and maybe a little offended. "Yes, ma'am," Morrison replied. "I have experience with human babies, and sometimes the techniques work across species. I promise I will be very careful with him." Lyrika hesitated. Morrison could see her internal struggle playing out in the changing colors of her skin. In Xanthari culture, only family members were allowed to touch offspring. But her people were also practical, and she had been trying to calm her baby for hours without success. Dr. Martinez stepped forward. "Lyrika, Captain Morrison has younger relatives on Earth. He has experience caring for infants. It might help." "But he is not Xanthari," Lyrika said. "He does not know our ways." "No," Morrison agreed. "But your ways are not working right now. Maybe we need to try something different." The station shook more violently and the lights flickered. Morrison knew they were running out of time. Enemy ships were probably targeting the main reactor by now, and once they hit it, everyone on the station would have maybe 5 minutes to live. "Please," Morrison said quietly, "let me try." Lyrika looked down at her crying infant and then back at Morrison. Her skin color shifted to a pale blue that Dr. Martinez had said meant reluctant acceptance. "You will not hurt him?" "I promise." Morrison said. Lyra-Ka stood up carefully and approached Morrison. Baby Vex continued to cry as she moved, his small face red and wrinkled with distress. Morrison could see that the infant looked remarkably similar to human babies, except for the slight crystalline sheen to his skin. "Support his head," Lyrika said as she carefully placed her son in Morrison's arms. "Xanthari necks are not strong until they are older." Morrison accepted the small bundle with the same care he would use for any fragile object. The baby felt surprisingly warm in his arms and weighed about the same as Morrison's nephew had when he was born. Baby Vex continued to cry, but Morrison noticed that the sound was not quite as sharp as it had been before. "Hey there, little guy," Morrison said softly. He spoke in English because he knew the universal translator would not capture the gentle tone he was using. "What's all this fuss about?" Morrison began to do what came naturally to him. He started rocking gently back and forth, the same motion he had used with his sister's children. He adjusted his hold so that the baby was positioned against his chest. Where the infant could hear his heartbeat, the crying began to quiet down. Morrison continued the slow, rocking motion and started humming a tune his mother had sung to him when he was young. He did not think about the fact that he was holding an alien baby in the middle of a battle zone. He just responded to a crying infant the way any human would. "That's better," Morrison whispered. "You're okay now. You're safe." Baby Vex's cries faded to small whimpers and then stopped completely. The silence that followed was so profound that Morrison could hear his own breathing and the distant sounds of the battle outside. The infant looked up at him with large eyes that were the same golden color as his mother's. Morrison felt a tiny hand touch his face. Baby Vex's fingers were small and soft, and they explored Morrison's cheek with the curiosity that all babies showed when they encountered something new. The infant made a small cooing sound that was nothing like the harsh cries from before. "How did you do that?" Lyra asked. Her voice was full of amazement, and her skin colors had shifted to a warm yellow that Morrison had learned meant happiness. "And relief, I don't know," Morrison admitted. "I just did what felt right." The other aliens in the room began to move closer. The Corvan delegates stopped their stress humming and approached slowly. The Thamelian ambassador's skin colors settled into curious blues and greens. Even the Etherian monks floated down from their corner positions to get a better look. "The infant has stopped making distress sounds," observed one of the Corvan delegates. His voice carried harmonics that the universal translator rendered as wonder and confusion. "How is this possible?" asked an Etherian monk. "The child was in clear distress for hours. What technique did you use?" Morrison looked down at Baby Vex, who was now making happy babbling sounds and seemed completely content. "I just held him and rocked him a little. This is what humans do with crying babies." "You have a natural ability to calm offspring that are not your own species?" asked the Thamelian ambassador. "I guess so," Morrison said. "We call it parenting instinct. Most humans have it." Dr. Martinez watched the scene with professional interest. "Humans evolved as cooperative breeders," she explained to the assembled aliens. "We naturally care for young ones even when they are not our own genetic offspring. It appears this instinct works across species barriers." Baby Vex made another happy sound and grabbed Morrison's finger with his tiny hand. The infant's grip was surprisingly strong, and Morrison found himself smiling despite the dangerous situation they were all in. "We need to move now, Sergeant," Collins said urgently. "The enemy ships are targeting the reactor core. We have maybe 10 minutes before they break through." Morrison looked around at the aliens who were now watching him with expressions of amazement rather than fear. "Can everyone move now that the baby is quiet?" The aliens nodded and began gathering their few belongings. For the first time in hours, they seemed ready to follow Morrison and his team to safety. But Morrison realized he had created a new problem. If he handed Baby Vex back to his mother, the infant might start crying again. "I think I need to carry him," Morrison said to Lyrica. "At least until we get to the escape pods." Lyrica's skin flashed with uncertain colors. "You would do this?" "Yes, ma'am," Morrison replied. "Whatever it takes to keep everyone safe." Morrison led the group through the corridors of Harmony Station with Baby Vex still cradled in his arms. The infant remained calm and quiet, occasionally making small happy sounds that seemed to fascinate the aliens walking behind them. The evacuation that had been impossible for hours was now proceeding smoothly and efficiently. "This way," Morrison called out as they reached a junction in the corridor. He held Baby Vex securely against his chest while using his free hand to check his scanner. The red dots representing enemy ships were very close now, but the escape pods were just 2 levels down. The group moved in orderly formation with Morrison's team spread out to provide protection. Sergeant Collins led the way while Private Rodriguez brought up the rear. Dr. Martinez walked beside Lyra Ka, helping to guide the other aliens and answering their constant questions about human behavior. "Your species does this naturally?" asked one of the Karvan delegates as they walked. His harmonics carried notes of deep curiosity that the universal translator rendered as scientific interest. "Most humans do," Dr. Martinez replied. "We have strong instincts to protect and care for young ones, even when they belong to other species, apparently." Morrison could hear the aliens whispering among themselves in their various languages as they moved. He caught fragments of their conversations through the universal translator and realized they were all discussing the same thing. How had he done what Baby Vex's own mother could not do? "Captain," said one of the Thamelian ambassadors, her skin colors shifting to questioning purples and blues, "does your species have special training for caring for offspring from other worlds?" "No," Morrison replied while adjusting his hold on Baby Vex. "This is just something that comes naturally to us. We see a baby in distress and we want to help." "But the infant shares no genetic material with you," pointed out an Etherian monk. There is no biological reason for you to risk yourself for his welfare. Morrison looked down at baby Vex, who was now playing with the buttons on Morrison's uniform jacket. The infant's golden eyes were bright with curiosity, and he seemed completely unafraid despite being held by someone from an entirely different species. He doesn't need to share my genes, Morrison said simply. He's just a baby who needed help. The group reached the first checkpoint where they had to descend to the next level. Morrison carefully navigated the stairs while keeping baby Vex secure in his arms. The infant seemed to enjoy the gentle bouncing motion and made soft cooing sounds that brought smiles to the faces of nearby aliens. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly as they reached the bottom of the stairs, "Command is reporting that the enemy has broken through the outer reactor shielding. We have maybe 5 minutes before they reach the core." Morrison nodded and picked up the pace. The group moved faster now, but still maintained their formation. Baby Vex began to fuss slightly as the motion became more rapid, but Morrison instinctively adjusted his movements to keep the infant comfortable. There, Morrison murmured in the same gentle tone he had used before. "We're almost there." The baby settled down immediately, and Morrison heard several aliens make sounds of amazement. He was beginning to understand that his ability to calm the infant was more unusual than he had realized. "How do you know what sounds to make?" asked Lyra. She had been watching Morrison care for her son with an expression of wonder and gratitude. "I don't really know," Morrison admitted. "I just listen to what the baby needs and respond. All humans do this." "All humans?" asked the Corvan delegate. "This is a universal trait among your species." Before Morrison could answer, baby Vex started to cry again. The sound was not as desperate as before, but it was still loud enough to make some of the aliens nervous. Morrison realized that the infant was probably getting hungry. "He needs to eat," Morrison said to Lyra. "Do you have what you need to feed him?" Lyra's skin flashed with worried colors. "I have the feeding supplies, but I do not know how to do this while we are moving." "Here," Morrison said, stopping the group beside a wider section of corridor. "Let me help you." Morrison carefully positioned baby Vex so that Lyra could feed him while he continued to hold the infant. He seemed to know instinctively how to angle the baby and support his head. The feeding process that had been difficult for Lyra before now went smoothly with Morrison's gentle guidance. "You understand the needs of infants better than the child's own mother," observed an Etherian monk. "This is remarkable, not better," Morrison corrected. "Just different. Lyra knows many things about caring for Xanthari children that I could never learn. I just happen to be good at the basic things that all babies need." The feeding finished quickly, and baby Vex seemed content again. Morrison resumed carrying him as the group continued toward the escape pods. But now something had changed in the way the aliens looked at him and his team. "Private Rodriguez," called out one of the Themelian ambassadors, "do you also possess these infant-carrying abilities?" Rodriguez looked embarrassed. "I've never really been around babies much, ma'am. But I think I would try to help if one was crying." "And you, Sergeant Collins?" asked a Corvan delegate. "I have 2 nephews back on Earth," Collins replied. "I've taken care of them plenty of times. It's not really a big deal." Morrison could see that the aliens were trying to understand something that seemed impossible to them. The idea that an entire species would naturally care for young ones from other species was apparently beyond their comprehension. "Dr. Martinez," said an Etherian monk. "Are there other examples of your species showing this behavior?" Dr. Martinez smiled. "Humans adopt children from other families all the time. We care for orphaned animals. We even risk our lives to save the young of species that might be dangerous to us. It's just how we're built." "But why?" asked Lyra. "What benefit does this provide to your species?" Dr. Martinez thought for a moment. "Because protecting the young ensures the future. Not just our future, but everyone's future. A galaxy where the young are safe is a galaxy where civilization can grow and thrive." The group reached the final checkpoint before the escape pod bay. Morrison could hear the sounds of battle getting closer and knew they were running out of time. But he also noticed that the aliens were no longer just following his team out of necessity. They were looking at the humans with something that seemed like respect and admiration. "Captain," said one of the Corvan delegates, "when we reach safety, I would like to learn more about your species' approach to caring for young ones." "I would be honored to share what I know," Morrison replied. Baby Vex made a happy sound and reached up to touch Morrison's face again. The simple gesture seemed to sum up everything that had happened in the past few hours. A human soldier had taken responsibility for an alien infant not because he had to, but because it was the right thing to do, and in that moment, Morrison realized that they had done more than just evacuate civilians from a damaged station. They had shown the galaxy something about humanity that would never be forgotten. The escape pods launched from Harmony Station just as the main reactor core exploded behind them. Morrison watched through the small porthole as the station broke apart in a brilliant flash of light. He still held Baby Vex in his arms, and the infant seemed fascinated by the colorful display outside, reaching toward the window with tiny fingers. "All pods are clear," reported Sergeant Collins from the pilot's seat. "Rescue ships are approaching our position." Morrison felt relief wash over him as he saw the friendly ships moving toward their small convoy of escape pods. They had done it. Everyone had made it out alive, including the crying baby who had nearly doomed them all. Baby Vex made a soft cooing sound and grabbed Morrison's finger. The infant had been calm and content throughout the entire evacuation, as if he understood that the human holding him would keep him safe. Laraka sat beside Morrison, watching her son with amazement in her golden eyes. "I still do not understand how you did this," she said quietly. "My people have raised children for thousands of years, but I could not call my own son. You held him for only moments and he became peaceful." Morrison looked down at the baby, who was now trying to put Morrison's finger in his mouth. "I think babies respond to confidence and gentleness no matter what species they are. When you're afraid, they can sense it and they get afraid too. But you were not afraid of him even though he was alien to you." Morrison considered this. "No, I wasn't afraid. He was just a baby who needed help, that's all I saw." The rescue ship approached their pod and Morrison felt the gentle bump as they were brought aboard. The pod door opened with a hiss and Morrison carried Baby Vex out into the larger ship. Other evacuees from different pods were already gathered in the main bay, all talking excitedly about their escape, but something strange happened as Morrison entered the bay. Conversations stopped and aliens turned to stare at him. Word of what had happened during the evacuation had apparently spread through the communication systems of the escape pods. "Is that the human who calmed the Xanthari infant?" asked a Corvan official who had been evacuated from a different section of the station. "Yes," replied one of the Thamelian ambassadors who had been in Morrison's group. "We witnessed it ourselves. The child had been crying for hours and no one could stop him. The human soldier held him and the crying stopped immediately." More aliens gathered around Morrison, all wanting to see the human who had done the impossible. They spoke in hushed tones, and their various bioluminescent displays flickered with colors that Dr. Martinez told. Morrison indicated awe and respect. "How? Did you know what to do?" asked an alien Morrison had never seen before. This one looked like a cross between a tree and an octopus and spoke through chemical sense that the universal translator converted to words. "I didn't really know," Morrison replied honestly. "I just did what felt natural." "What felt natural to you was completely foreign to every other species present," the alien observed. "This suggests that humans possess unique characteristics related to child rearing." Over the next several hours as they traveled to the nearest safe station, Morrison found himself answering the same questions over and over. Aliens who had never spoken to a human before approached him to ask about human child-rearing practices. Scientists wanted to study his responses to infant distress signals. Diplomats asked if all humans showed the same protective instincts. Baby Vex remained calm throughout all of this attention, seeming to enjoy being held by Morrison and occasionally reaching out to touch the faces of curious aliens. When the infant got hungry, Morrison helped Lyra Ka with the feeding. When Vex got tired, Morrison rocked him gently until he fell asleep. You care for him as if he were your own offspring, observed an Etherean monk. Yet you have no biological connection to him and no social obligation to ensure his welfare. That's right, Morrison agreed. But he's still a baby who needs care. The rest doesn't really matter. Dr. Martinez joined the conversation. What Captain Morrison is demonstrating is a key aspect of human evolution. We developed as cooperative breeders, meaning we naturally help raise children even when they aren't our own genetic offspring. This trait apparently extends across species boundaries. This is most unusual, said a Corvan scientist. Most species show protective behavior, only toward their own young or those of closely related species. Your willingness to care for completely alien offspring suggests a level of empathy that we have not encountered before. Morrison felt uncomfortable with all the attention and scientific analysis. From his perspective, he had simply helped a crying baby. The fact that the baby happened to be from another planet didn't seem particularly important. It's not that complicated, he said. When you see someone small and helpless in distress, you help them. That's just basic decency. But even as Morrison downplayed his actions, he could see that something significant was happening around him. The aliens were recording everything he said and did. They asked to take images of him holding baby Vex. They requested detailed reports about human child-rearing practices to send back to their homeworlds when they reached the safe station. News crews from a dozen different species were waiting to interview Morrison and his team. The story of the human soldier who had calmed an alien baby during a dangerous evacuation was spreading across the galaxy's communication networks. Tell us about the moment when you first held the infant, requested a Themelian journalist whose skin displayed patterns that indicated intense curiosity. Morrison found himself telling the story again, with baby Vex still in his arms. The infant had become so comfortable with him that he fussed whenever anyone else tried to hold him, even his own mother. What do you think this incident reveals about human nature? Asked another reporter. Morrison thought about this question seriously. I think it shows that humans see all children as worth protecting no matter where they come from. We don't think about species or genetics when a baby is in trouble. We just think about helping. The interviews went on for hours. Morrison learned that similar stories were being reported from other human units stationed throughout the galaxy. There was the human medic who had successfully treated injured alien children using techniques she had learned caring for human kids. There was the human engineer who had modified safety equipment to protect alien infants during an asteroid storm. There was the human teacher who had developed new educational methods that worked for multiple species of young learners. It appears that this protective behavior toward alien young is not unique to you, observed one of the reporters. This suggests it is a species-wide trait among humans. I guess so, Morrison replied. We just think of it as being normal. But Morrison was beginning to understand that what seemed normal to humans was extraordinary to everyone else in the galaxy. The idea that an entire species would naturally extend parental care across species boundaries was apparently unprecedented. In galactic history, baby Vex made a happy sound and reached up to pat Morrison's cheek. The simple gesture was captured by cameras and transmitted across the galaxy, becoming one of the most viewed images in interstellar history. It showed a human soldier gently holding an alien infant with the same care he would show his own child. The legend of humanity's gentle strength had begun.